Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's session. I'm Sean Gibb. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at Pro Manchester, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Mental Health and Wellbeing of Lawyers Post-Lockdown, hosted by Slater and Gordon. Today's speakers are Hannah Beko, lawyer, executive coach and trainer for lawyers at Authentically Speaking, and Martin Beauchamp, Chief Customer Officer at Slater and Gordon. Following today's session, I'll send out a post-event email which will contain any post-event collateral, links to where you can find out about other Pro Manchester events and our new YouTube channel. You can watch the recording back. So if you want to subscribe to that, that'd be great. And this email will also contain a feedback form. So if you could take 2 minutes to fill it out, it really is helpful for us to continue to improve our offerings and provide consistently great content. So that would really be appreciated. Just a couple of signposts for today's session. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. Please keep your microphone on mute throughout. And please use the chat function to ask questions, make comments, observations, etc. We'll try our best to answer as many of those towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Hannah.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. Yes, I'm gonna, we've got some slides, so I'm gonna start that. Unfortunately, when I've got the slides on, I won't be able to admit anybody from the waiting room. So what I may do is we'll go through the first couple of slides and then I'll just have a quick look and see if we've got anybody waiting to come in. Hopefully that's all right with everyone. So let's start this. So welcome to today's session about mental health and wellbeing in the law, particularly in relation to how it's going to change, or how it has already changed, and how it's going to change post-lockdown as well. So just to sort of set the picture, before March, so before COVID, caused lockdown, etc., what was the position for mental health and wellbeing in law? So there's lots of statistics both in the UK and in the US on this, and it's something that I've personally been interested in for a few years. So one of the most startling statistics that came out a few years ago from the Law Society's research, and it was a particularly big piece of research, it was about 8,500 lawyers, and 95% of them reported suffering from moderate to severe work-related stress. So obviously quite a very big issue. The average lawyer, again, pre-COVID, was working 60 to 80 hours a week. And people who do work over 50 hours a week are more likely to have issues with alcohol abuse and drug abuse and things like that. And lawyers are one of the top 5 professions for a high suicide rate. So it is and has been historically a very, very stressful profession. As I say, that's even before the situation that we found ourselves in over the last few months. So the Junior Lawyers Division of the Law Society has done some even more up-to-date research as well. And 90% of those surveyed experienced stress in their role. 26% said that it was severe and extreme levels of stress. 38% had experienced a mental health problem in the month before they were surveyed. Now, and I do this personally, when I'm talking about mental health issues, I'm not talking specifically about diagnosed conditions only. Stress and chronic stress are, in my mind, a mental health issue as well. So whether that's formally diagnosed or not, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health issues. And the Junior Lawyers Division found that this was an increase of 13% from the previous year. So it is something that is increasing year on year in the profession, which is obviously a big concern. So there are also issues for us post-COVID, and that's what really today's session's about. So I wanted to sort of just set the picture for you before this year, but now there are obviously new issues facing us that are on top of the stresses and the pressures that perhaps we already had in the profession. So the sorts of issues we're looking at post-COVID, we want to look today at what challenges are law firms going to face, what as organisations and as employers do they need to be thinking about, and what preparations can they be making to support well-being going forward. So yes, as we come out of lockdown and as we make what is possibly going to be a phased return back into the office. And my personal hope is that, can we use this time to make some leaps forward in terms of lawyers' mental health and well-being? So it isn't just supporting people coming out of lockdown, but can we use this opportunity to, change those statistics that I mentioned right at the beginning? What challenges do individual lawyers face? So for me, there's two parts to this. There's the organisation and the employer, and then there's the individual lawyer themselves. What are they going to face, and what can they as individuals do to help improve their own well-being as well? So there's the two sides there, the organisation and the individual. So now I'm going to hand over to my co-speaker, Martin, to come and introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Beecham, and I'm Chief Customer Officer at Slater & Gordon. I've been lucky enough to work in a range of industries across a range of countries in my career. And I'm in legal services really because I feel that the whole industry is at a real inflection point. And the way we consume services generally now is changing so rapidly, isn't it? And I don't think legal services is going to be any different. So it's a really exciting place to be. I'm also a non-executive director at the Charities Aid Foundation, which some of you may have heard of. And I live in South Manchester with my wife, Helen, and my two children, Charlie and Millie. I'm delighted to be here, really looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, thank you, Martin. So my name's Hannah Beko. I'm a commercial property partner. I am self-employed, have been for the last 8 years. So I am very familiar with the working from home model, although obviously pre-COVID. But because I'm self-employed, I'm fortunate enough to be able to spend part of the week doing commercial property and part of the week doing things like this. So I founded a second business, Authentically Speaking, 4 years ago this month, actually. And that is speaking, coaching and training predominantly for lawyers. So I certified as a coach and as a corporate trainer. And that is, what I really love spending my time doing as well, working particularly in the area of mental health and stress, but also in sort of general personal development and professional skills development as well, which to me all link back into the stress and things like that. I'm also involved with the Women Lawyers and Mothers group that some of you may have come across. It started in London in 2018 and we launched in Manchester in September 2018. And that's really a support group for, yes, women, but we do have some male supporters as well, some in Slater & Gordon's, I'm very pleased to say. And that's really a support group for people who are juggling the career with parenthood. And obviously there'll be some interesting changes coming out of lockdown for those people as well. I live near Macclesfield in Cheshire, and I've got 3 boys who are 10, 6 and nearly 3. So it tends to be pretty busy in our house. And I chose this picture here because this was a presentation I did at Slater & Gordon's London office a few years ago. And Martin may talk about his London office, hopefully at some point in today's presentation.
I recognise a few of those characters there, actually, Hannah.
Do you recognise some? Yeah. So yes, there's interesting developments with that you might share with us later. So I wanted to start off before we get into the sort of actual discussion, just by looking at these statistics that I think Dwayne is actually on the call today of Realm Recruit. And I know he's been really busy over lockdown doing lots of research about law firms and the legal world. And this particular piece of research that he shared with me is, how is your business and your work being impacted by COVID? And this one statistic, or the two statistics of the same thing, I think are really, really interesting. So when he asked employees, so the lawyers, how do you feel about how well your employer is looking after your mental health and well-being? 40% of employees said that they felt it was well or fairly well that they were being looked after. But when he asked the same question of employers, 90% of them said that they thought they were looking after their employees fairly well or very well. So you can see there's a big difference between how employees think that they're being looked after versus how employers think that they're looking after them. So hopefully today's discussion will give some firms an idea of other things that they might be able to do as well to sort of perhaps bring those numbers a little bit closer together. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on those statistics, Martin, have you?
Yeah, I think, from an employee side, I recognise that discrepancy. I think I've been in a position before, we're all employees, aren't we? But I've been in a position before where I've felt actually that the views of management are clearly disconnected from the views of employees. And we've probably got a similar, maybe not to that extent, I hope, but perhaps we've got a disconnect at Slater and Gordon. And the way we try to get around that, I think we'll probably talk about this today, is just by keeping a constant conversation going to make well-being and work from home and work-life balance a daily conversation, which has never been before. And we use technology to do that. And I think that's enabled us to reduce that disconnect as much as possible.
Yes, I think, well, you make a key point there that I'm sure we're going to talk about today is that constant dialogue and that communication piece. I think that's absolutely right. So what issues are we facing coming out of lockdown? Let's have a bit of a chat about these. Now, what would be great, we can't see your comments while the slides are still going, but if you have any thoughts on any of these points yourself, I'm sure everybody are Zoom experts by now, but you'll be able to find a chat box towards the bottom of your screen. So feel free, as we make any points, to go into the chat box and put your comments in there, because at the end we'll hopefully have enough time to go back and have a look at those comments and see what your thoughts are as well. So as I say, if anything comes to mind, then do pop that in the chat box. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, Martin, was this enforced working from home, and how do we think that's going to impact firms and individuals going forward? So my thoughts on this, and then I'd love to hear yours, are personally, I think it's a great thing to have happened that we were sort of forced to work from home, but that's because I'm someone who's loved working from home the last 8 years. Yes, it's not without its challenges, and yes, I do have an office that I can go into whenever I do want to, which I tended to do about once a week. But for me, that sort of flexibility to drop the children off, to pick them up, and actually the saved commute time and all those things are something that I personally really value. But I know that historically, obviously, a lot of firms weren't set up for large scale working from home, because you do need good IT systems. You absolutely do. And many firms didn't have that, whereas of course they now have to have that. But also there was a lot of people who really believed that their job couldn't be done from home. I do property, and even in the weeks before lockdown, I was speaking to so many other property lawyers who said, well, I just can't do my job from home. And I didn't want to say, well, actually you can, because I've been doing it for 8 years and I can do large completions with 20 properties, etc., and do all that from home. So from my perspective, it's sort of forced us to improve the IT and to show firms and individuals that it can be done. So I'll see what your thoughts are on that, Martin.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And looking at the bullet points on the rest of this page, I think so many of them come from this key driver. So many of these challenges come from the key driver of being forced to work from home. And when I look at how it worked out at Slater and Gordon, so fairly soon after lockdown was announced, we moved to 97% of colleagues working from home. And it stayed at that level pretty much since, actually. And the 3% of colleagues who are not working from home tend to be in areas like post and document management. And that has been a real moment of clarification, I think, for most of us, in that we can do our jobs from home, especially if you're in the legal support side of the business. I'm sure we'll come on to this. I won't talk about it now, but the role of tech is so critically important there. I think when we think about a world in which perhaps it's not enforced, and when we've spoken to our colleagues, 90% of our colleagues actually want to spend more of their time from working from home now. Now they've experienced it. And of those colleagues, on average, people want to spend 2/3 of their time working from home now. So you can see how things have changed over the period. And some people will want to work from home all the time. Some people will want to go into the office for part of the time. Some people will need to go into the office for part of the time. And I think figuring out with our colleagues across all or whatever industries we're in, but across the legal services, trying to figure out what people want, aligning what people want and need to what customers, clients want and need, I think is going to be a key challenge for us.
Absolutely. Yes. No, I think that's really interesting. Those statistics are fascinating. You've got very high numbers of people wanting to work from home, the 90 odd % you said, and also the 2/3 from home as well. It may be another bullet point, but it's something you and I touched on actually right at the beginning before we started, which is, for that many people to want to do it on a large scale when this experience we've had is not the ideal. I've sort of lived the dream, if you like, of working from home, but this is not it. Having my 3 children at home and my husband and fighting over the office is not the dream of working from home at all. But the fact that people have seen so much benefit in it, even in these trying times, is really fascinating, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why I'm very optimistic about what the future holds, because I don't think any of us truly know what working from home is like, for those reasons that you've just discussed, quite apart from the anxiety that is out there beyond the home. We just don't know what it's like to work from home all for most of the week in a non-COVID situation. And I think that has potential premiums for us all in terms of productivity and our well-being, camaraderie, all these things I think we're going to go on to talk about.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's have a look at the next one. So, furloughed staff returning. Martin, do you want to kick off with your thoughts about the challenges on this bit?
Yeah, I think clearly this has proved to be a really delicate and nuanced situation, isn't it, for all of us, actually, whether whether we know people that have been furloughed, or we have been furloughed ourselves, or perhaps we work in HR and we're part of that process. So certainly in our experience, we found it a real challenge, and just to get it right, because clearly wellbeing has a key aspect here. And we've found that actually it's as much about the colleagues that are not furloughed as it is about the colleagues that are furloughed, because there can be anxiety for those that haven't been furloughed, that perhaps they're next, or perhaps those that haven't been furloughed think that they've got the entire burden of the work that's been left that is now on them. And that creates anxiety. And I think that was a real insight for us, that in terms of well-being, we had to pay as much attention to those who hadn't been furloughed as we had to those who had been furloughed. So we had to handle it with great care and consideration. And obviously, we're now thinking about what's next with the announcement yesterday around the job retention bonus that the Chancellor has made. And of course, the furlough scheme is going to be wound down gradually until the end of October. But for us, it was all about communication. And clearly, there's only a certain amount that you could communicate to those colleagues who were furloughed. So we found that a particularly challenging experience to get right from a wellbeing perspective. And we sought to get continuing feedback as we went along, just to make sure we were getting it right.
Absolutely. I think, and anybody at any other firms, this is something it would be great if you could put your thoughts in the chat box, about what firms perhaps have done well or haven't done well in this regard. And I love your comments there, Martin, that, you realised that you had to look after the people who were not on furlough just as much as those who were. But I think that's perhaps not the norm, because I personally was finding that those who were on furlough were not always being taken care of almost at all. They were sort of put on furlough and sort of left. And that was something I was personally very worried about, because, lawyers are hardworking, high achievers. That's what brings us all to the law. And the idea that these people are one day in work and then another day told to be at home, and not allowed to work effectively. So I was really worried about their sort of mental health and well-being, just sort of being furloughed. And I think some firms have done very well with staying in touch with them, and others haven't. And some feedback I've had from some people who've been on sort of quite a longer termed furlough, 3 or 4 months, and some are still on it, and they've been told it could be sort of September, October before they come back. What they were saying to me that they'd really like to see is possibly some form of sort of re-entry training, because it's things like, they've forgotten how to use some of the IT systems maybe, and even a sort of technical update as well. Because what I was thinking listening to them is, it's like when you have a maternity returner, often women who've been off for 6 or 12 months have suffer a sort of fall in their confidence when they come back to work. And I think it would be great if firms are ready for the fact that furloughed staff might have some of those feelings as well. Their confidence might take a bit of a reduction, having had time off and not not been doing the day-to-day work, that they may need a little bit of extra sort of training and update training and things like that when they come back?
I think it works both ways as well, Hannah. I think there may also be some training that's needed for those who are welcoming colleagues back as well. You read in the media about non-furloughed colleagues essentially just waiting for the furloughed colleagues to come back, crossing their arms, saying, we've been holding the fort while you've been away. And so I think just making sure that colleagues are reintegrated into the firm from the perspective of people that were there to start with, and from the perspective of those who are coming back, is really important. And I think it's a pan firm challenge that needs to be worked through.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's something that definitely needs thought, as you say, from both perspectives, the returning and those who are already there, definitely. So homeschooling challenges. Now, this is an interesting one because things have changed since we actually first talked about this presentation and put it together. Because I know when your colleague Jay and I first had the idea about this session and what we were going to cover, we thought we needed to cover the idea that even in September, when schools are going back, we assumed it would be on a phased return, so that we'd still have lawyers working probably predominantly from home, but still with the challenges of having some school children at home sometimes. But of course, recent announcements are that they expect to have all the schools open by September. So I don't know, Martin, have you had any thoughts on what the challenges will be for your firm as we come back into September?
Yeah, I think things clearly have moved, but it's so important still to call this out. We have at Slater & Gordon what we call a happiness button, which is on our intranet, and essentially colleagues can, and I've done it myself, you just click on it and you just share how you're feeling, and it's all anonymous. It enables us to keep a real pulse of people's well-being. And homeschooling, it was from the very beginning one of the greatest sources of anxiety that we have, which I think is why it's important that we call it out now, because while for some people have gone back, kids have gone back, we've still got this legacy of anxiety that it's caused. And also there's a different sense of anxiety now, because just because the government says that actually it's okay, some people are now privately thinking, actually, well, okay, is it okay? What happens? What happens when they're there? And it's that anxiety is still there, even though the kids may not be physically there. And I think that's very much an important context I think we need to consider as we go through. And some people have still got kids at home, of course. It's not everyone whose kids have gone back to school. And there's a division, isn't there, out there? Some kids are continuing to get really good education. Some kids, depending on which schools they go to, have tech, and others haven't. And that creates anxiety as well. But I think that one of the legacies from homeschooling that has affected our industry, and perhaps others, I think very positively, is that when you've got kids running around and jumping in on your Zooms and everything else, or like Charlie and Millie, our kids who kind of like Navy SEALs, they crawl in on their tummies because they don't want to be seen in order to rescue something from the room. It's led us to signpost and ring fence, I think, a lot better in terms of our hours. So I think we're being a lot bolder in saying, actually, because I'm homeschooling the kids, I'm going to be doing that from 8 till 10. And actually, I'm going to be doing, I'm going to end up late working maybe until 9 o'clock at night to make up my hours. And hopefully it's given us a lot more confidence that actually we can manage our time, that we're trusted to be treated like adults, and we will continue to deliver for our colleagues and for our clients. And homeschooling, I think, has forced that issue in a little bit. So hopefully that's a very positive legacy we can take.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think many of us have had, because that's what my husband's a lawyer as well. So that's what we've had to do. We've had to tag team. So, plenty of times I've had to say, well, I can't have a meeting before 11 because I'm playing teacher until 11, and he has to say the same in the afternoon. So I think you're right. We've become much bolder in saying, I can't do that particular slot because I'm teaching or with the children at that time. So I think that's right. And I also, to pick up on the first point you made, that whether or not all the children go back in September or not, because I'm sure there's still question marks over that. Obviously, is there going to be a second wave, or is there going to be any issues within individual schools that mean they shut down? I think it's still very, very unknown. So I don't think there's any givens that people will be back in the office in September at all. And one point that it's also worth making, I think, is that we have no idea yet about the impact this is going to have, not just on our own mental health and well-being as adults, but that of our children as well. And I think, and I've spoken to many sort of, other coaches and psychologists and things about this, that there could be a real sense of almost PTSD for not only the adults and the children as well. So I think it's a good thing if employers bear in mind that as their employees come back into the office in September and onwards, that they may need to be very flexible with them in terms of when they need to be there for their children and things like that. I think it would be good to be prepared for that rather than to find it as a surprise, perhaps.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at our next point. So productivity, which we've touched on already. So I'm very pleased to see that most of the stats show that productivity has increased while people are working from home, which I think is fantastic, given that we've not been doing it in the most efficient circumstances, as we've talked about with homeschooling and worries about health and people being on top of each other, etc. But I think that shows that the possible productivity working from home after this could be much higher.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there is a productivity premium still to come, and hopefully that's in all our interests. I think we've seen the same. I think we've realised actually that lawyers and legal support staff and shared services staff just across the industry are so much more resilient than perhaps we've given ourselves credit for. And therefore productivity has continued. But I think a key point here is it doesn't mean that it hasn't become harder to deliver that productivity. And I think that's where our well-being comes in. And I think that's where we've really got to just take care of each other, because we may find when we come out of this, actually we don't want a situation whereby we find we're all been running on empty and adrenaline, and we've delivered on the productivity, but actually it's come at quite a high personal cost. And I think this is the PTSD that you're referring to there, Hannah. And we've found actually, certainly from Slater and Gordon's perspective, clearly tech is key. It's vital that you have the right kit, like chairs and screens and laptops, but you also need to take care of the details, like making sure you've got the right broadband at home and make sure you've got the right length of cables as well. So all these things need to be taken care of. But hopefully I'm very optimistic actually about productivity around the corner.
Yes, I think there are definitely two sides to it. There's the side of the business and of the organisation, which is very happy to see productivity stats go up. And I think it supports the argument that many have been making for years about the benefits of remote working, flexible working, agile working. If it's approached properly, it will always increase productivity. Giving people that autonomy to decide, do they do some exercise in the morning, go for a walk, play with their children before they start work, etc., will always increase their productivity. But yes, it does come at a cost. I mean, burnout is up during lockdown. So yes, people are producing more, and yes, they are burning out more. That is an absolute fact. And that's what hopefully towards the end of this presentation, I'll just give you some tips about how we can be looking after our well-being a bit more. So yes, it's a two-sided coin. I'm very happy to see productivity being up, because it's what I always would have said. If you encourage more people to work from home, you will see an increase in productivity. But yeah, going forward, how do we make it much more sustainable so that people can be healthier, mentally as well, plus see that increase in productivity too. So yeah, definitely double-sided, that one.
I mean, it's tough, Hannah. If you're a young junior lawyer and you're working on your bed with your housemates next door cranking up the music, and you've got real obligations that you need to satisfy to your clients, that can be stressful. And therefore, even if you do it, the energy that you need to expend to maintain that level of quality and service during this period is really high. And I think that's what we need to pay particular attention to.
Yes, it can be done for a short time, but it can't go on long term like that. No, absolutely. So our next point here is office camaraderie, because obviously the flip side of, we all love working from home, let's work from home much more. But there's not many people I've spoken to who say they want to be at home 100% of the time. Very, very few, actually, because people do miss the being in the office with people and the water cooler conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, human to human connection is, certainly for me, really makes life worth living. No one wants to sit on their bottom facing a laptop in their home all the time. And I think there are a number of things here. One, we're actually just trialing now moving some of our colleagues back to our Liverpool office, and these are predominantly call centre staff, but the joy that people have in seeing each other again has just been wonderful, and you just cannot underestimate that, and how we need that, and it's so precious, and it's lovely to see. And I think there's something else around needing that support network around you. So for example, we may have some people on the webinar who might work in areas like wills or family, and some of the conversations you have with clients can be very difficult, very traumatic, very emotional, and you know, lawyers really give themselves to those conversations. And when you come off that phone, if you're in an office environment, you have people who you can talk to. You can just say, look, I've really had a really tough call. Can we just have a chat about something? When you're by yourself in your home and you don't have that support network around you, it can be quite lonely, I think. And so, you know, we need to come up with a solution to that for those who will continue to work from home. But B, I think that phased transitional approach back to the office, in whatever balance that is, I think will help colleagues who have felt perhaps a little bit isolated in those kind of environments.
Yes, maybe it's something that none of us fully appreciated before now, you know, how much we would miss our colleagues. And that's a fantastic story you've said there, you know, to see the joy of people coming back together who work together. That's amazing. And I know it's something I definitely look forward to. I can't wait to go and have a cup of coffee with my PA. It'll be a celebration day, I think.
Yeah, I think, again, taking the opposite side, there are always opportunities, I think, in situations like this. And I think we've found actually we've all developed a new form of closeness, haven't we, together? You know, I think we all now know our partners' names and our pets and our kids' names, and that, I just don't think that would have happened in the office. And I think everyone's embarrassment thresholds have almost gone up. Before, the thought of your kid rushing in on a important meeting would have brought everyone out in a sweat. But now it's like a badge of honor. And I think what this has taught us is that we don't need to sweat the small stuff anymore. I think, you know, if we need to say, actually, I can't work at this time because I've got children's obligations, and you can say that. If your pet rushes in, or if your partner brings you a cup of coffee during a meeting, that's okay. And it's almost forced us to innovate as well, hasn't it? To replace this camaraderie. You know, you've got virtual bingo and virtual dog walking and garden clubs and yoga and meditation, and my own personal favorite, virtual breakout. I still don't know how that works, but you know, all these things wouldn't have happened if we were in an office environment. And I'm hoping once this is all over, we just need to keep some of this going.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's a good point, because if we do have more working from home, which is what we're hearing everybody wants, then you need to bring in some of those innovative systems that you've just mentioned, you know, because if you aren't in the office quite so much, then maybe you do need the Zoom team meeting once a week, or coffee break at 11 o'clock or whatever, that can help keep people connected, even if they do want to work from home more. So we've learned a good lesson there anyway.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, if COVID, of course, is first and foremost a human tragedy, but it's also proved to be a test bed for ideas. And so I think we just need to make sure that so many of the ideas that we've tried and those that have worked, we continue. We don't just forget all these things that we've tried and that have worked during this period. We keep it going, and that's going to take some effort.
Absolutely. So a point that you started to touch on earlier was supervision. So whether you've got trainees or paralegals or NQs, you know, we've obviously had to be innovative in this period to work on supervision, whereas previously we'd have said, well, that job just simply can't be done from home because you need to be supervised. So how have you found that at Slater and Gordon's?
Yeah, it's clearly a challenge, and talk to any of our senior lawyers about it, and I'm sure they'd say the same. I think there are two areas of challenge in particular. The first is that juniors just don't get to potentially listen to as many calls. They don't see seniors in action as much, and they miss out on that informal observation. They don't get as many opportunities just to overhear someone having a difficult conversation or observing dictation. Just sitting next to someone, I think, who's going through life as a senior seasoned lawyer, I think is something that we haven't figured out yet as an industry how to replace. The second is that, as I mentioned before, some of our more junior lawyers across our industry can lack access to a quiet space, and we need to figure out, well, how do we continue maintain client confidentiality, of course, which is an absolute priority. So somehow, and we haven't figured it out yet longer term, but we need to figure out as an industry, how do we recreate this natural traditional setting where all these little sparks of engagement occurred and people could observe in this next normal. And I think clearly Teams will be critical. That's the technology that we use. The importance of being flexible will also matter. But I think this is an area where it's still very much a work in progress for us as an industry. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts about this.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that if anybody does have any ideas on that point, do feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll have a look at those at the end, definitely. I suppose my only suggestion with that would be, it's always about communication. And I know I have spoken to some juniors who say they felt a bit uncomfortable because obviously they'd normally be sat next to their supervisor and they could just raise issues with them as they needed to, whereas obviously when they're both at home, they almost felt they didn't want to bother their supervisor. So, you know, my suggestion was, well, could you have a time of the day where you say, right, whether it's 2 o'clock or whatever, that's the time we'll have a quick call, and maybe it'll be, I've only got one question to ask you, or maybe it'll be, I've got 2 or 3, but it's giving them that, making them feel that it's okay for them to have a time where they can ask questions, I think is valuable. But also, as you said, it's them being able to learn from watching their supervisor in action. So I suppose Zoom meetings could be used for that. You know, if they have client meetings over Zoom, you know, all parties meetings, so they can still observe, you know, the language and the way that they hold the meeting and things. So I think there's options there as well. Yeah,
I think that will rely on us improving our noticing skills as well, because we've really got to pay attention if we're going to do that over Zoom and over Teams. And I don't think we've got a choice. You know, things are not going to go back to as they were. That's a fact. And therefore, we need a solution to this.
Certainly. So one thing that I'm hoping you might mention is environmental changes. So using our office spaces, how is that going to change potentially? And you know, commuting. I mean, my view is that if less of us are commuting, then that's got to be a positive for the environment, not only just the time that we save, but obviously environmentally as well.
Absolutely. I think the reign of the office has looked a little bit wobbly for a while now. I think people have, like yourself, Hannah, and me on Fridays, so people have been working from home increasingly across the world. And certainly we envisage a situation over the longer term where offices are essentially repurposed and become more areas for collaboration, teamwork, networking, and so on. And in a way, actually, it's kind of returning us to our historical norm. Working in an office is relatively new. It's only since the 19th century that we've started to work further from home. So kind of if you were to take a long-term perspective on it, kind of getting back to where we started. But at Slater and Gordon, we've moved essentially from having 9 offices to nearly 2,000 offices. And that's created a very different relationship with each other, our local communities, and also with our clients. And as you mentioned, our commute is now, it's up the stairs, isn't it? Potentially, rather than on a train or a number of trains. And it's a seismic change for us all. And so I think all of us across all industries are going to be looking at our space and saying, okay, well, what space do we need now, given the fact that some of our colleagues will prefer to work from home. And I think that's a very, very live conversation, not only across the legal services industry, of course, but across every industry right now.
Yes, it certainly is. I suppose where it's in some cases more prominent in the legal industry is that historically, of course, we've had a very big culture of presenteeism in the office. You know, we've probably all in our pasts worked for firms where, you know, either it was frowned upon to not be at your desk, or certainly your line manager or your boss frowned upon it if you weren't at your desk. So it would be extremely interesting to see that switch to a place which I know a lot of firms have. and where it is a hot desk system, and it's sort of, well, actually you're only allowed in half the week because we only have half the office space now, and so you can come in half the week and work from home half the week. So it's a very interesting shift from, well, we must see you at your desk at all times, to actually, well, you know, come in as little as you can, which will be really interesting, and a whole sort of mindset shift, I suppose, for many in the legal profession.
Yeah, that presenteeism is really important, because I think it's something that hopefully has come out of this is more trust in people. I remember I had a round table, coincidentally, with some colleagues just about a month before lockdown occurred, and we were just talking about work-life balance, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And one colleague said to me, "I'm just, you know, I don't think I'm trusted. I'm not trusted to work from home. I don't feel trusted." And my boss has essentially kind of implied that. And I was horrified by that. But I think now what's happened is that hopefully we are all trusted. We've shown, actually, we are all adults, that we can be trusted to work from home, even if we work in different hours. We are maintaining the same levels of quality service to our clients and the same levels of productivity. And I think that trust premium could be massive, I think, coming out of this. And if the one thing that comes out of all this is that we all feel more trusted as people, then I think that's a wonderful thing. And it's a shame it didn't happen before across the industry.
Yes, you can't go back to saying, well, we don't trust you to work from home when we have for the last 4 months.
Yeah.
So I think we've possibly covered this already in terms of phased returns to the office. Again, this was written a few weeks ago, I suppose, before offices have started to open up. But I know there's, from what I'm hearing, there's differences. You know, there's some firms that are already welcoming people in, and there's some firms that are saying, no, it's going to be September, October before we welcome people in. So I suppose it's different for different firms.
Yeah, that's right. I think clearly every firm's going to have their own plan. They're going to have their own priorities, and you'll end up with a balance. You'll end up with people from home and people from working in the office. And as I mentioned, we're currently trialing our Liverpool office return as well, just to see how that works and how colleagues manage that level of anxiety. What we're realizing is that it's really important just to keep colleagues engaged throughout all of this. So we're running a consultation process over the summer as to how we should configure this. Some people will need to come back, some people will want to come back, and aligning those two, it can be quite tricky. So we really want to take our people's needs and desires into account as much as we can. So that's an enterprise-wide project that's underway now that has representatives from each and every department that is figuring out how we're gonna handle this. And you know, the proof will be in the implementation of that plan.
I've been surprised, actually, how many firms have said that they have sent out questionnaires to people to ask them, you know, what are your thoughts about coming back? When do you think you will feel comfortable to come back, and how often in the week? Which I think is fantastic. You know, like you've mentioned a few times, it's that consultation with staff, it's involving them in the decision-making process. So I'm really pleased to see that so many firms are doing it, and it would be, you know, a recommendation if firms aren't yet, to definitely have some sort of survey, whether it's anonymous or not. You know, don't suppose it matters, but to find out what people's thoughts are, and then perhaps use that in implementing their plan. I don't think that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I hope that's part of well-being now being part of our daily conversation. You know, if anything can come out of this period of time, if well-being can continue to be part of our daily conversation, then that's, again, something very precious. And I think these surveys, these consultations are very much in that spirit.
Absolutely. I may take you and quote you on that at some point, Martin. I like that. So, new landscape. I suspect we've probably covered this already. So, enforced working from home, will it create a new demand for flexible and remote working? Well, your stats, Martin, have already shown that it has, as I think as other people's statistics.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Have lawyers' values changed or been reassessed? Now, I had a very interesting conversation with a business psychologist a couple of weeks ago who said to me that someone had said to him that values of previous generations were all around family and things and community, whereas our more recent generation's values have been around career, achievement, promotion and things like that. And I said to him, I'm not sure that's true. I think that's what we've seen, But actually, this period of lockdown has given all of us a chance to reassess what's really important to us. And I think it goes back to your point about work-life balance, about well-being. Suddenly, we've all been reminded about the importance of our health, both physical and mental, and our families, and how much time we spend with them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in a fundamental sense, things haven't changed in terms of values. Our lawyers and our legal support staff are, and I'm talking across the industry in my observation and comments, still as client focused, still as focused on their professional integrity, commitment to quality output and supervision. You know, those values still haven't changed. But more broadly, I've certainly noticed a shift towards work-life balance, a shift towards being more caring, showing more of an interest in others, acceptance in our own little quirks and needs in this time. You know, values a shift towards more problem solving, actually, because I don't know about everyone else, but this last few months has been like a permanent stream of improvisation. You're kind of just learning your way through it. And none of us were prepared for this or trained for this. I certainly wasn't. And I think, you know, more problem solving, more improvising, more innovation. I think they're values that I think hopefully will endure. And actually, I think more of a focus on diversity and inclusion. I think, you know, this whole point around lockdown and COVID being a clarification moment for us all. I think combining that with the reflection that you've just mentioned, Hannah, again, combined with international events such as the death of George Floyd, means that we're seeing a renewed demand, not an interest, a new demand across the sector for robust D&I cultures and programs. And again, I think that's a value that's going to emerge quite strongly from this, and rightly so. Yes,
couldn't agree more. There's going to be some very interesting developments, I think. And we've touched on this as well, is work-life balance being redefined. I think it absolutely is. I think people are looking at it in a way that perhaps many people didn't allow themselves to before. It was, no, I must be in the office between 9 and 6, and that's what it is. Whereas now I think they're starting to think, no, you know, can I be at home a bit more and spend a bit more time, either on my own exercise or with my children or whatever it may be.
I think there's also a different way of looking at this. I always thought that the term work-life balance is a bit of a shame. It seems to suggest that it's either work or life. And actually work is life, isn't it? And I think therein, though, lies a bit of a challenge. I don't know about everyone on the call, but sometimes I feel like I'm in this blizzard of pinging Zoom and Teams meetings. You know, you haven't even finished one meeting. You could already see that someone started the next meeting. And that creates a very new anxiety. And it's because our days have lost any form of traditional architecture. I think, you know, we don't have the commute. You know, even going to the bathroom takes less time than it does in an office. You know, everything is condensed, and it can feel relentless. So I think even though we are all more focused on work-life balance or work-life integration, I think we do need to think more about how we can build better control into our day, so that we don't replace one work-life challenge with another. And that's certainly something that I feel very, very conscious about, not just for me, but for my team as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think it will continue to be the challenge that it always has been, perhaps from almost a different perspective. But it is something that I think we need to be. I always say to people, you've got to be continually vigilant about your work-life balance, what it means to you, what you want from it, and continually assessing it. I think
we need to develop almost a new skill, Hannah, in managing ourselves and our days better.
Yes, absolutely. And we've certainly covered this. Productivity increases in lockdown show that working from home works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked long and hard about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've covered this one. You know, what impact will office space reduction and reduction in commuting times and things have? I don't think. Have you got anything else to add there, Martin?
No, I don't actually. No, I don't. Apart from the fact that it will be a balance. You know, office centricity may be over, but you know, client centricity is not over, and you know, colleague centricity isn't over, and we just need to find that balance.
Very true, very true. So I want to go through this last couple of slides just very quickly so I can have time to have a look at the chat, because I know we've had a few people put some comments in. So what can lawyers themselves be doing, which support a lot of the things that Martin has actually touched on? Now, these are all very common sense things. You probably read them and say, yes, we've heard this 100 times over. But I always say to people, yes, you may have heard them before, but, do you put them into practice? Do you remember them? So, my sort of top tips for well-being, if you like, do try and make some time to get some fresh air, even in the day, if it's just stopping to look outside the window for a little while. If you can get outside in the fresh air, all the better. I'm a big fan of not watching too much news. Yes, we need to know the important updates. And yes, I was hooked at lunchtime yesterday to the stamp duty announcements, because that's going to make me very busy. But generally not following too much news if that impacts your well-being. The simple things like, are you stopping to drink enough water in a busy day? Like Martin said, when it's one Zoom call to the next, can you just nip out and grab yourself a drink and something to eat when you need to? Getting enough sleep is so important, and without the commute now, I really hope that means people are getting time to get as much sleep as they actually need, because there are studies now showing that a lack of sleep is even more detrimental than smoking for our health. So it's really important we get enough sleep. Some people are using the time to learn something new. Some people are saying, no, I'm just using the time to spend more with my family, which is, you've got to do what's right for you. Getting some exercise, of course. Gyms might be opening again soon. And my top tip is to work out what's best for you and your family, and whatever that is, how can you bring that into your everyday life? Productivity, Martin has mentioned this a few times, and he's right. How can you create some sort of workspace for you, even if you don't have a separate office or a separate dining room? I've seen some people work from their ironing board. A space, I always think it's important that you have a space that is separate from your usual living space. So I say to people, if you can, don't work on your bed or don't work on your sofa, because that's where you'll go to relax. Can you create a space that even mentally in your head is separate from the place that you go to work? It's always good to try and wake up at the same time, go to bed at a similar time. I am a big fan of actually getting up and getting ready for the day. I don't work in my pajamas. I know it works for some people, but I don't feel I've started the day. So again, you've got to do what works for you. Can you spend 10 minutes before you start work either connecting with your colleagues, having a quick call or dropping them a few emails, or doing a bit of business development? Sometimes it's good to spend 10 minutes doing something before you get straight into the sort of catching up on emails or whatever it is that you normally do. And just for productivity, if you haven't heard this before, it's very good to chunk your work down. So do it in segments. So say you're reviewing documents or something, say, well, I'll do that for 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'll turn on to doing something else, and I do say to people, if you can, if you're working on something, meaty like that, turn off your internet perhaps, so you've not got the email notifications coming in. Turn off your phone so that you can just focus on the work in front of you, because you'll get through that work so much quicker if you're not being interrupted by other things.
And I'd mention one thing there, would you mind?
Yeah.
Just in terms of my biggest learning, this is as much I've found about managing your energy as it is about managing your time. And I think just paying better attention to how you're feeling, if you're yawning, or if you feel restless or hungry or struggling to concentrate, I think it can be easy to ignore those signals. But I think just by paying attention to those and then doing things like Hannah was suggesting in the wellbeing, then you can actually drive up your productivity. And that was a big realization for me. I always thought it was about time, but it was actually as much about energy. And that was a big deal for me.
You see, I have a great training on time and energy management, Martin. You've given it a nice little plug there. Thank you. But you're right. It is about energy and managing it rather than it is about time, because you can get so much more done if you use your energy productively, then you don't need as much time, which is always good when you have children to school and things. Connection, we've talked about quite a bit, because it is so important. We do as humans need connection. So there's virtual team meetings. Everybody's been using Zoom and Teams, keeping in touch with WhatsApp groups. If you in your organization can see ways that it could be improved, then go to your line managers or your HR department and make those suggestions for improvement. I'm sure they'd be pleased to hear. And I'm always worried about, sole practitioners, people who work on their own. If you are in that situation, who can you reach out to so that you've got someone to talk to? Like with any person in business, it can be very lonely if you're the only one. And who can you reach out to for support? And Martin has talked about this. You know, I love to hear what Slater and Gordon are doing. They are doing regular checking-ins on their teams. He's got the happiness button he talked about. You know, within your teams, how are you checking in on, you know, even if you're the line manager and you've got 2 or 3 people underneath you, you know, are you regularly checking in on them, you know, asking them out of 10 how they feel that day, that sort of thing. You know, that's always nice to, because we're not seeing each other every day. You'd like to think that if you were seeing someone every day, you would notice if there was a you know, a drop in their well-being, etc. But remotely it's a bit harder, so it's important to make that time to check in on people, I think. And yeah, being aware that everyone is different, the way that people work, you know, the times of day that suit people are different. I'm an early morning person. My husband is not. He's a later on in the day person. It goes back to the energy point Martin made. You know, when you know that your energy is best, you know, how can you sort of work your day around that, and be aware that everyone else in your team could be going through that as well, that they've got very different needs as well. So I want to just give us a minute or two to check at the comments in the chat box. And Martin, if you've got anything else you want to sort of add or anything, then do jump in there while I have a quick look at the chat.
Yeah, all I would say actually while Hannah's doing that is just on the subject of connectivity and connection. I think what I've realised is actually we need to almost retrain ourselves to look out for each other. We almost need to improve our noticing skills. Something we might see if we were sitting next to someone, we might miss if we're communicating with someone over Teams or over Zoom. So I think focusing on being really observant as a means of better connecting and taking care of each other, I think is one thing I'd add to your points there, Hannah.
Yes, I think it's harder. Don't get me wrong. Seeing people in person is always better. You know, whenever I'm doing my coaching or whatever, it's nicer to do it in person. But when that's not possible, you know, it can still work with the technology as well. You just have to, as you say, be a bit more aware. Yeah. So just going through some of these comments, we've had. Previously at my firm, only fee earners were allowed to be agile, but the firm has now had to acknowledge that everyone, you know, even support workers can do it, and it does work. Someone else has said they're also in commercial property and they can do their job from home, but the firm has been very discouraging to let me or anyone else work from home because of internal procedures. They say, am I able to insist that I be given the guidance to work from home where able? So there's an interesting one. Which might be better aimed at perhaps someone who knows more about employment law than me, but I think there will be big changes generally to the way that HR approach any requests for flexible working and things after this, because I'm not sure how they could say that job can't be done from home as a result of this. Someone here is a Slater and Gordon employee. The company's attitude to remote working has taken a complete 180 as a result of COVID. It's been a great thing and much welcomed by the majority. They do feel anxious at the prospect of coming out of lockdown, which I completely understand. Anxious for the kids returning to school. Your 6-year-old is back a little bit as mine is, but no, it is a worry about how children are going to cope back in school. I completely understand that, and I'd love to see that firms are ready to support their employees when they're struggling with that. Someone as a team leader has made their team do karaoke. Embarrassment thresholds now through the roof, which is excellent.
Karaoke. I like it.
Yeah, there you go. There's an idea for you, Martin. As a trainee solicitor, I've joined a number of calls with solicitors and clients, and it's been very beneficial to me. I've attended meetings and overheard conversations that I would have missed out on if I wasn't in the office. I've also found a great way to raise queries is having a weekly forum with other junior lawyers. We have an associates forum for everyone in the department, from paralegal to associate, where we can collaborate and ask each other questions, which has been very useful. That's fantastic. Communication is absolutely key, as someone has said, and being more innovative in terms of using video online tools. We do need to get better at realizing that we don't all communicate in the same way, and it can actually cause others stress if we don't communicate in a way that's compatible with their style. Absolutely agree. And the final one is not feeling trusted was a common feeling pre-COVID, but this has now really changed, which is brilliant. So no, I think trust has always been the linchpin to this. The reason we didn't work more from home was a trust issue. And now I think that's sort of been proven that it's not true. So I think we'll see big changes. Any final thoughts, Martin, before we let everyone go?
All I will say is I'm hugely optimistic actually about the future of our industry, and if we're prepared to adapt and change and improve the way we serve our clients using technology and recognizing how their lives are changing, then if we're prepared to do that, I think the future for our industry is very bright.
I completely agree. A fantastic note for us to end on. I'll just see if Sean wants to come in and say anything. Sean, do you, before we let everybody go?
Not particularly, other than just to say, obviously it goes without saying, thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you to Slater and Gordon. And thank you to all of you as well for attending and taking the time out of your morning. So really appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.